Welcome to the Leadership by Design podcast, where thoughtful leaders share lessons from their journey. I'm Dave Adams, founder of the Business Freedom Group, and today we have Susan Westwater of Pragmatic Digital. So welcome, Susan, and I'd love to start off with you telling our audience a little bit about yourself, your company, what you do, and the journey that brought you here.
Sure, absolutely. I'm Susan Westwater, co-founder of Pragmatic Digital, as you mentioned. We are a consultancy that essentially helps leadership navigate this world of AI. We've been in the AI space since 2017 and have been focusing on, I would love to call it AI enablement, but that's not quite, because we map to process workflow and AI transformation. So it's a bit deeper than training and education, but it is a complete package of how do we lead in this age of AI in a way that's authentic, but also lines up from basically moves from novelty to more of an important thing of actually solving business problems.
That's great. It sounds like an impressive journey. And any nuggets you want to give us about your journey before that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we come to this not as a fly by night, but my husband and I founded Pragmatic after spending about 20 some years in the customer experience advertising spaces, primarily in Chicago. And then I actually have done some stints working in corporate, leading content teams and operations, so that we have a very balanced view of sort of how things should get done and how they really get done. And we don't believe in innovation for innovation's sake, but let's really get things done, and let's get them done in a meaningful, helpful way.
Well, I love your name. Pragmatic is a word that often comes to my lips, so I look forward to our conversation.
Sure.
So, you're in the middle of the big trend, the AI trend. So, what trends are you seeing within the big trend, if you will, of how people are adopting, how they're thinking about it?
Having been in business long enough to have navigated web, mobile, social, all of those big disruptions to how people behave and how people work. The big trend I'm seeing right now is we're starting to see that traction. We're starting to see the reality of how do I take this from novelty and individual benefits to how do I actually make this do something for an organization? And that's a very different thing. We're also seeing that trend of where I think we're seeing a lot of shopping cart behavior, in the sense of I'm just going to grab all these AI tools, throw them in my shopping cart because they're saying it solves this, this, and this, and this. And then having a big pile of AI enabled things, but not always the best way to navigate them, because it's sort of the consequences of, hey, I have to hurry up and do something. I have to do something that makes me working with AI. I think we're getting to a point where that folks are realizing that the hype, while exciting and energy, it just injects so much energy and changes conversations. We do need to get back more to, and forgive me, this is why we're called that, a more pragmatic way of an intentional way of applying AI, or at least incorporating it. And I think that we're seeing that we're hearing smarter questions in the sense of, what are the consequences? What are the unintended consequences? So those are important things that we can address as we move along and bring all of this technology, and also, quite honestly, at that moment have an opportunity to look and say, maybe it's not, using technology to, you kind of can't out tech your way out of a bad strategy or a bad go forward or go to market, just as you can't out strategize bad technology either. Let's take a moment and look at our process. Let's look at how we do our business operations. Let's look at our workflows, and then let's think about being smarter with that, because we have this moment where it's perfectly acceptable to kind of blow things up a little bit, but also examine them.
Well, it's interesting. I think you recently had a LinkedIn post or newsletter or something that said something about, AI won't fix a broken process.
It'll expose it, yeah.
Right. So do you find leaders are fairly open to acknowledging the brokenness of what they have, or at times do you find they kind of chafe at that idea?
I think that where we end up these days is that we definitely have folks who are at a mix. And that's where mindset comes into play as well, of, are you ready to make these changes? But it's just like with every other change management program. And so this isn't just adding tech. It's thinking about, how are we going to get people to embrace this? How are we going to address all of the emotional charges around it? And I think those are the things that come into making this almost feel like, to my friends who work in change management, saying, well, it's not that different. But I think that's kind of that piece of it. I laughingly say, and humor lies close to the fire of truth, that AI just simply makes if you aren't thinking about your processes, it will make things move faster, but it will also make that crater as you quickly arc back into the ground. It just makes it bigger if you don't think about those processes. I do see now that we don't get those questions as much of, well, where's the AI in this? when we start thinking about, hey, well, we need to make sure that you're prepared for this, as opposed to just putting that tools. And that's part of what we do. And I think that's the step that happens after we see, as that aforementioned shopping cart of, hey, this didn't do what it was supposed to, or it didn't solve all my problems, but that's because the underlying workflow wasn't addressed or it wasn't thought about. It was just kind of tacking it on. We need to think about how we actually integrate that into how we do things.
Okay. And do you see that people are more using AI for internal productivity or for external, customer facing functions?
So we see both. A lot of what we're seeing, though, is a lot of there's basically we help our clients in the sense of there are a million things you can do with AI. And that's what makes it so disrupting, so amazing, such an exciting time. The reality, though, is then there comes down to the idea of what we should do. And that becomes that tougher question. And so that's where we kind of look at that prioritization. What we find when we start looking in highly regulated areas, when we start looking at other things, we still need to keep humans involved, very much so. Even if we talk about agents and we get really advanced. The reality is that there's 4 main areas that we see and we counsel our clients on if we're trying to make a meaningful change. And one is, does this help me get business? Does this help me deliver excellence? So that's whatever it is I got in my business and I'm in the business of, how does that help me deliver that so that I can do that better and a better end product? Because the goal is better. And that's kind of, a mantra of making it better with AI. It's not making it just faster. It has to be better. And then there's the growing business. So that's, what are all the ways that I can use AI to make my relationships with my customers deeper, or that I can retain? Because we all know it costs a lot more to acquire than it is to retain. So how do we lock in there? And then the final thing underneath is what we call running smart. And we do see, especially with the general I would say the general hesitation of, hey, I'm regulated, I can't put things out there, or I've seen all these horrible mistakes that have been happening. We don't want to be the example. We definitely look at a crawl, walk, run in the sense of, let's figure out how this works connectively internally. And that could be everything from agent assist of supporting your customer service teams so that sales, customer service, and marketing are all using similar content. It doesn't mean that they're copy pasting, but that, hey, this has been powerful and resonating. Let's make sure everyone else knows about it. How do we tap into those things? Or is it simply, how do I just make policy enablement work? There's some questions I have from HR and I don't need to ask a human about this. I'm just asking for facts and things. How do we make sure that we're optimizing scheduling, things like that? Those are things that are really powerful. And then they make the case for, as the discipline gets there, as the proof points show up, then we start to see a much more openness to, how do we turn this into customer experience that's external facing? There's so many things right now that have AI baked in that it's important to make sure, again, that we're using what their tech stack is, working within that. So we see a balance of that comfort zone. It is interesting too, because the word du jour is AI slop, of all those things that AI can tell. But what's always interesting to me is it's just as like what we saw with synthetic voices. And when we were looking at voice things, is you recognize the bad ones, but you don't recognize the good ones. And that's where hopefully, as we keep moving, we've seen that synthetic voices now, they are hard to identify, a whole other session to talk about. But what we're seeing as well with that is, when done right, when done where it's properly, and it's done with, again, that human in the loop, it makes it possible to start to make authentic external things. But the important thing is walking that fine line between human touch and then also basically facilitating it so that we can do more of that, the things where humans are best.
And do you see differences between B implementations and B2C implementations and how leaders approach the two?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to B2C, there needs to be more forethought into, how is our brand showing ourselves up? How are we being that much more authentic? A lot of the B2C clients that we have worked with, they already have what I call like the legacy of where they're existing elsewhere, how they have been manifesting themselves for maybe 100 years or maybe 50 or 20. That all comes into play then of, how do we make sure that sounds? So there's a little bit more thinking and preparation that needs to happen. Not that B2B doesn't have that, but that isn't necessarily always a major consideration. We still have to make sure we're relevant. We still have to make sure. And I think what we see with B2B is that they're definitely using the intelligence side as opposed to the experience side, or the entertainment side, say, if you will, of those experiences. So AI enables all of those things. And so I think it's more of B2B definitely is looking at it from a sense of how do I make sure that I'm aiming better? How do I make sure that I'm more relevant? How am I doing these things? And of course, that makes sense from a B2C perspective. But the underlying, when we start getting into that, does become a little more complex because of the creativity, because of the humans are going to human. And with B2B, there is a little more, for lack of a better term, a little more control or predictability, only because of how we know what those things are and those parameters. So we don't have as much cultural influence, or there isn't suddenly a white hot trend that comes in and then suddenly changes everything. I do see those difference in nuances. And in some regards, I think B2B sometimes is actually a little more willing to experiment because they know they need to be competitive. And they know that they need these advantages, and they do see that power of AI a little bit more quickly than the I'm just going to do my traditional routes of customer engagement. There is a little more of a willingness to innovate, to work smarter, not harder. Relevance is the important thing that then builds that relationship. We have ways then of making sure that we continue that relevance. And I like to think of personalization as relevance, because it's not good enough to know my first name and to know, I have a dog and whatever. It's more about the so what. And that is, I think, the power that our B2B clients are seeing of, wow, I can get to so what faster, and I can be more consistent about that. I can make sure that whatever sales intelligence has, we can find ways. But again, that all comes from discipline with how my data is structured and how those groups are working across each other. AI kind of forces the issue. I wouldn't say it solves it, but it forces it, because it exposes, wow, you have these three different silos and they're not talking to each other. You are missing opportunities to make those things all work together to be that much more strong. And then therefore that much more personalized, special relationships that then become deeper and build fans when you deliver what you're supposed to.
Now, almost all businesses are some combination of established process and tribal knowledge.
Yes.
And so do you see AI sort of upsetting that balance, moving it more towards the process side, or, because I think a lot of businesses struggle with, I just got to get this done.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they do it repeatedly, they never go back and sort of establish a process for it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I would say this, if you get things done, you have a process. Whether you like it or not, you have a way of getting something delivered. I can't tell you how many conversations I had where someone's like, we don't have a process. I'm like, sure you do. You wouldn't be in business if you didn't. It may not be pretty. There's 1,000 steps because of the what ifs or the things along the way. What AI enables is that, so a process is a process and it's fine. What we have the opportunity to do with AI is to unlock some of that tribal knowledge, so that when someone retires, when someone is done their incredible 30 years of service and therefore knows so much more than could ever be captured in any type of offboarding of document, we have an opportunity to capture that, be it through how our process is, of how we talk through the process in the first place. We then put us in a position to kind of unlock that process to work well as we optimize it or change it depending on what needs to be done. But then we are able to rebuild it with that person's tribal knowledge. We have ways of capturing that. And that's the important thing about breaking down those silos and making sure that those insights are there. A lot of folks talk about AI being about efficiency, but it also can simulate. It also can clarify. It also can provide insights that we might not have seen through the pattern recognition. I'm not saying that it's going to be able to do, it's not great at math. We all know that. But being able to kind of start seeing those white spaces and opportunities through that pattern recognition. That pattern recognition comes from if we can fuel that with the smartest people in the room. And that way, then it allows them to be able to see that and then capitalize on it. The goal isn't, I want you to give me all your knowledge so I can replace you. It's, I want you to give me all your knowledge so that I can combine that with someone else's knowledge. And there together, we're actually going to be able to uncover things that we wouldn't have previously seen because you don't have the time, because you've been doing all of these other things. Those are the big things that make a change, as opposed to, I just want it really fast and inefficient. So that way, then I can just do more. Those are the best uses, are those deeper interior versus those, what I call kind of like the edge work of polishing or content generation or things like that. And there's nothing wrong with those, but there are so many deeper ways that we can look at it, from helping me do competitive, helping me identify perhaps a churn risk, or understanding of, they have this level tier of service, but we notice that they're hitting this level. It's capturing those types of moments so that way then you can find those insights about how do we set up these contracts, or how do we do those better things. AI pays for itself.
So I loved how you kind of grouped AI into four buckets: getting new business, growing with
Mhm.
the customers you have, delivering the value to those customers, and also running smart, which I hear is kind of internal operations.
Yeah.
So giving advice to somebody who's just getting into this, let's say the medium-sized business, what area would you advise them to walk into first?
Now, not to sound like too much of a former UXer, it depends on what it is where they're having their biggest challenges. What are their business goals? What are they not meeting? Where are those areas of opportunity? We always like to start with either a customer journey map or a business review so that we can understand um, my biggest goal is not to solve the same problem again. If you've already solved the problem, what are the things that we aren't solving? What are those things that need to happen? And if I need to move someone, like let's say I'm having a problem where deals aren't closing as opposed to having retention challenges, we then will look at that and say, okay, what's going on in that process? What's going on in that particular workflow that's happening? And then we will look at that. I would love to say, just start with an LLM and experiment and go. But the reality is, and yes, you need to do that to be aware of what it is and to understand it. You don't need to go take a Python class. There's so many different free model things that are out there these days that even OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, everybody offers. And then I think I just saw MIT put something back out. There are places where you can get familiar. But more importantly, all of that's wonderful. But if you don't know what you're solving or you don't know what it is that change needs to be, it kind of like, as much as I hate to say it, it doesn't matter.
Well, I
Because
loved your
yeah,
mention of a customer journey map to
yeah.
understand where you're underserving the customers and that sort of thing. That's great. And if I switch into leadership in general now, what do you do to keep yourself growing as a leader? Is that the same thing you would advise other leaders to do, or is that different?
So I'm in the business of AI. So it's my job to be exhausted keeping up with AI. If you love it and it's your exciting hobby, or not even a hobby, but that's just a topic you're into, excellent. But you're not, don't panic if it's not your favorite thing and you don't want to know like what's going on with the Sam Altman and Elon Musk lawsuit this morning. That's okay. There are some incredible newsletters out there. There are some incredible reporters is kind of what I refer to them as, who do give like the good old too long didn't read TLDR summaries of what is happening in those particular spaces. There also is an incredible visionary out of Wharton, Ethan Mullick. I follow him. He has a book that he's written about called Co-Intelligence. He does test like all of the models constantly and is kind of sometimes going down rabbit holes that I wish I had the time and budget to do. So I follow those particular groups. I also would follow some of the major models, like just following their accounts to see what they're putting out from a feature. But I would also then challenge and say, get really good about what your strategy and what it is your objectives are, and then start to then look at what some of those books there are. Gosh, I feel like there's a new book every.
Sure.
We've co-authored two books. But those are the things that I would go down the path of. But I would also look to vet an expert. But I do think you need to have more knowledge, more awareness and understanding of what the implications of AI are going to be. My other advice is, if, again, this is something you really want to dive into, is make sure you get the counter narrative. So Emily Bender and Timnit Grebu, they call it the AI con. They have very measured. Hear that counterbalance of what that is, because that's very real. There's a lot when you're bringing AI into your organization. The first is, as we're doing all this, and there's some research that I've been involved in for the past 5 years, about almost 80% of organizations made AI a priority, said that AI was going to be a priority. And this is reported by their actual employees, not them telling in this particular, because it's consumer research. What was very interesting, though, is less than 30% of them were getting formalized training. Their AI policy wasn't clear. So as a leader, I think it's less about all of the technology and more about how are we rolling this out so that we are compliant, so that we are giving clear guardrails. Because while an ethics policy is incredibly helpful to your customer base, to internally of, yes, we're doing the right thing, that isn't enough to tell someone what they can and cannot do with AI. So we need to think of from the leverage of policy plus governance. I think it's a balance of understanding the governance implications, the regulations a bit. And you can do that again either through summary emails and things like that as well. Yeah.
What advice would you give to leaders about how they manage the humans during this whole AI, period.
I think be aware that it is very tempting to lean into your AI champions, and you should encourage your AI champions. Those are the folks that are what I call builders. They're going to do whatever new things they can do. Those are the people who are taking Python courses because they want to, and they're going to build all these things. The problem is with those particular folks is that a lot of times they're building for themselves, not for others, and so those things don't get used. Adoption is not monolithic. It's not everyone's going to be a builder. We're going to have people who take customization and they're going to say, I saw what the builder did. How do I customize that? Or how do I customize the GPT? And then we have people who just say, just give me the thing that I know is going to work. It's going to make my output better and is compliant, and no one's going to tell me I'm cheating. Help me feel safe to use it and comfortable. Those are all different mindsets that we have to acknowledge. My goal is always to try to get what I call the straight up AI user into an AI customizer. But the reality is those are those folks, and acknowledge the resistors, because when you have your training, your champions are going to dominate the conversation. But you really need to listen to the resistant and the user to understand if you really want your whole organization to embrace AI. Hear the fears, hear those things, and address them and provide those assurances. Now, that doesn't mean it's never going to take your job. If you have a task-based job, we're learning more and more about how there is a risk. But then find ways to help those folks understand where they can dive into those strengths. And again, that tribal knowledge, get them to contribute to that. Get them to upskill towards those things. Can't do that for everyone.
I love the battle cry, listen to the resistor.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you have to do what the resistor says.
No, but
listen.
Just
understand, because that will then bring it more meaningfully to your entire organization as opposed to just pockets of teams.
Fabulous. Well, Susan, thank you. It was a real pleasure. And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in to Leadership by Design to keep your thinking fresh with thoughtful lessons from folks like Susan. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.